Hello and a warm welcome. You're watching my YouTube channel, Smita Sharma Journalist. Now, we have focused on the continued protests in Albania in our past, in fact, vlogs as well. But the situation continues to be something that needs to be talked about. Albanians are out on the street. What we see has been termed as the Flamingo revolution, the Tirana protests happening in the capital. People out there on the streets for more than 35 consecutive nights now, essentially to protest against an ultra luxury resort project that has been reportedly linked to Jared Kushner and to Ivanka Trump, putting flamingos to a whole bunch of wildlife species at high risk. People there also going out to the streets to tell the political leadership that Albania is not for sale. Now, there have been some really interesting visuals that have come up on social media. I'm joined here by Phinease Rueckert, who is a senior journalist. He was formerly an investigative journalist with Forbidden Stories that reported into the global investigation into the NSO Group's Pegasus system, the surveillance system. Currently, he's working as an independent journalist who is in Paris, but was in Albania this past week, reporting on the story, looking at what was happening on the ground. Phineas, bonjour, comment ça va?
Bonjour, Smita. It's good to be here. Doing well. Thank you.
How's the heat wave treating you now that you're back in Paris?
So it's picking back up. I was lucky actually to be in Albania where it was 36 degrees when it was 42 degrees in Paris, which is it's unheard of. So at least in Albania there's air conditioning, so I was pretty lucky and I was able to sleep pretty much every night. So,
yeah, we did a report last week on that story in Financial Times about the cultural war going on in Paris about to have ACs or not to have ACs.
It's still raging, yes. And this week it's supposed to pick up to 36, 37 degrees again, and I'm sure that debate will come roaring its head back.
I hope you stay hydrated and stay well. So, talking about the Albania story now, Phineas, tell us, first of all, what were your ground impressions of these protests? Did you travel beyond the capital city? What did you see? What did you find on the ground?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to, like you said, keep an eye on these protests, because I think yesterday was the 35th day of constant day in, day out protests. I was there for day 31, so that marked 1 month of the protests, which was a big milestone. Earlier this week, a number of European parliamentary leaders were also on the ground to check out the protests. And to answer your question, I think the feel on the ground is of something quite unprecedented. Albania, you have to understand, is a country that experienced a horrible dictatorship for more than 40 years. In 1991, the country finally transitioned to democracy, but it was a very rough transition. It was a very uneven transition. In 1997, the country almost descended into civil war. There are two basically political movements that exist in Albania since the fall of the dictatorship, which Albanians consider both to be equally corrupt. There's the Democratic Party, which is the party that took over after the dictatorship fell, led by Sali Berisha, who is the current opposition leader. And then there's the Socialist Party, led by Edi Rama, who has been in power since 2013. And essentially what you kind of get when you're on the ground is that Albanians have had it not just with the current configuration, but with the past one as well. Essentially what they're saying is, since the start of democracy in Albania, there hasn't been a true democracy in Albania. And so that's why this sort of, one development project sealed behind closed doors, between, the son-in-law of the US president and the Albanian president, who's ostensibly socialist. The Albanians see this as sort of symptomatic of this broader lack of democracy. And they also, they're very clear to make this not an anti-American protest. So actually, when you go to these protests, you'll see a lot of American flags held with Albanian flags next to one another. They're not trying to say this is anti-American. In fact, Albanians love the United States. But what they're trying to say is we're against this way of governing. So I was in Tirana for about 1 week, and I also went to Vlora, which is a town on the coast of Albania, which is actually the closest to the Narta wetlands, which are the threatened wetlands that would be devastated by this Kushner and Ivanka Trump project. I also went to Sazan Island, which is has become known as the Kushner Island, which is a former military base that is where the biggest part of this development was slated to take place. But this is actually just one part of a much bigger development project of this whole area. So there's an airport, there's there's highways being built through these very pristine and sensitive wetlands. And so that's sort of what kicked this all off, but it's now become a much bigger protest against the whole system. So you can think about the French Yellow Vests, or you could think about Occupy Wall Street. There are some similarities to this sort of leaderless horizontal movement that's going against a system that's considered to be equally corrupt on both sides.
Okay, those are some very interesting points that you've laid out for us, and I'm going to circle back into some of those points. Just to let the viewers know that, of course, the protests began on 23rd of May, which was in a village close to Narta lagoon that Phinease talked about, which is that protected area near the coastal city of Vlora, where this project is supposed to be built. And it traveled to the capital city of Tirana by 31st of May. Since then, for consecutive days and nights, Albanians have been out there on the street. Mostly the protests have been very, very peaceful, but we have also seen chants of, protests against the Albanian president, the Albanian Prime Minister, Edi Rama, asking for his resignation, both outside the parliament, within the parliament. There were some occasions when we saw, in fact, some spurts of violence happen, Phineas. Do you think that violent part of the protest is largely under control?
So, excuse me, while I was there, every single protest that I attended, so I attended 4 protests, were very peaceful. I didn't see any even rowdiness. To be honest, compared to French protests, it felt very tame in many ways. I, of course, have seen some of the footage of some of the altercations that have taken place at other protests, and I'm sure that this, as any contestatory movement, this can happen. And I think part of what has made Albanians even angrier, actually, is that they've been considered and they've been compared to violent protesters. They've been compared also to having been financed and supported by abroad, by Iran, by other actors, so sort of foreign interference, which of course they're saying is not true. In my experience, almost everyone that I saw and spoke with was from Albania. Many of them are Albanians living abroad because Albania has an enormous diaspora because of the catastrophic economic situation now and since the fall of the dictatorship. But my own experience of having been to 4 protests, they're very peaceful. What happens is the Albanians a group will come together in Skanderberg Square, which is a big central plaza in the center of Albania, and then they will walk about 5-10 minutes to the Prime Minister's office, which is just down the street. Usually the groups will gather behind a banner. It kind of changes per week, but sometimes the banner will say Albania is not for sale. Sometimes it will say that in Albanian. The protesters will project images onto the Prime Minister's office using a projector. So often that sign will say Albania is not for sale. Sometimes it will show videos. In terms of who I saw there, it's very diverse. They're very diverse protests. Young people, old people, families. There's actually a kids section that's set up at the bigger protests. where there's like a large sheet of paper that's set up on the floor, and then kids have crayons and are sketching and drawing. There's of course many people holding these flamingo cutouts made out of cardboard and sort of dancing around, and one of the chants that people were singing as they danced around at one of the protests I attended, they were singing Bella Ciao, but instead of Bella Ciao, they had replaced it with Rama Ciao, Rama being the prime minister. So it's a quite creative, quite in my experience, again, positive and not just people yelling. There's also a lot of sort of creative energy.
Right. It resonates a lot in countries, especially like mine, where every protester is labeled as a Pakistani or as a foreign hand, just like you mentioned that they are being accused of this being infiltrated by Iranians and the other players. But you said that there is no mass anger or resentment against the United States. The Albanians actually love the Americans, but it's really about the Trump family and this entire deal done in secrecy. Now, we understand that the government has granted them a special investor status. So usually this is done either a G2G formula or a business-to-business formula. Who is the special investor? Is this particularly Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump then?
So it's quite complicated and a bit in the weeds, but essentially, I mean, it's not only American money. I think there's also some Qatari money and possibly some Saudi money. I'd have to check that. I would recommend to get really deep in this specific angle of it, the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, OCCRP, and a journalist who I met with while I was on the ground, Lindita Sela, is doing some of the best work on sort of trying to actually figure out where this money is coming from and how it was funneled into Albania and into this project. But again, the reason why this has sort of struck a chord is that there is no transparency. In fact, it's very hard to know exactly where the money is coming from, exactly how the deal was set up. What we do know is that in 2024, environmental protections that had been in place actually since 1991 were removed very quietly for this one particular area, suggesting that perhaps there were some sort of larger machinations that were already in place back then. But then really the moment that the protest picked up, the reason that you mentioned May 23rd, is because that's when a private security company had started to build a fence and actually started to construct in this Narta area, and a protester who had been there to push back against this, what they consider land grab, was actually dragged by private security in a very violent way as Albanian police watched. And so again, Albanians felt at that moment like this was sort of, not the deep state, but it was a foreign actor on Albanian territory that had more power than the actual Albanian defense establishment that was supposed to be protecting Albanians. So again, yeah, I would highly recommend checking out the work of OCCRP on this topic. It's still being figured out exactly where the money is coming from.
So a final question then, Phineas. I mean, we have seen the opposition ask for resignation of Tirana within parliament. Of course, I understand that people are also angered at the opposition itself because, these two parties have essentially been oscillating in power. Have you managed to get a word from the Prime Minister's office, whether they are willing to look at it, relook at it, backtrack it? There has been confusion around the wording that they have used, when it comes to the hearings within the EU and the environmental compliance regulations. And what do these protests really mean for the Balkan politics vis-a-vis United States and the European Union?
Mm-hmm. So I should say that I'm not a Balkans expert. I have reported a bit from the Balkans, and I am still learning a lot more about this region. What is important to know is that Albania has ambitions to join the European Union by 2030. And this domestic sort of battle that's going on right now is actually very linked to that. One reason that Tirana reportedly got this deal is that he actually says this is going to bring in enough money, tourism jobs, and sort of development along the coastline that it's going to make sort of Albania more attractive for an EU bid. So if you go to the center of Tirana and you look at the Socialist Party headquarters, you'll see that on the facade of the building it says EU by 2030. So this is actually one of Rama's biggest promises in his when he was in his most recent re-election. So he's kind of he was in a certain sense banking on this project as a way to actually get Albania closer to the EU. Of course, this has backfired because European leaders have actually questioned the taking apart of environmental regulations, and that's actually doing a disservice to the EU accession project. Whether that changes Albania's sort of order in line, if you will, for joining the European Union, it kind of will depend on what happens over the next month. From what I've been told, from what I've heard on the ground, it doesn't seem like the protesters are ready to let up anytime soon, but it also doesn't seem like Edi Rama is ready to just let up anytime soon either. So the real question going forward is sort of who is going to win this standoff. Does Edi Rama back down at a certain point? Does he pass some sort of major environmental law that would sort of end the swirling questions about sort of his intentions, or does he continue, and as has been the case so far, to be quite critical of the protesters? So one of the protest signs that you'll see day in and day out, it says "F you, Edi Rama." I won't spell it out. Why did they put that? It's not just to be rude. It's actually because in an interview, I believe with the Financial Times, Rama himself said "F you" to the protesters, as in, you're not really representing Albania, I am. And so the question is, and sort of the deeper question that these protests bring up, and I think that's why they're so important, is, how do you build a democracy? And who builds a democracy? And so is it the protesters who are saying we want something more horizontal, something more distributed, something more equal, or is it a sort of top-down, here's how we're going to develop, we're going to have all of these big sort of flashy development projects that will get us into the European Union, which will then open up markets that didn't exist before. So I think there's a lot that goes into this, and it's hard to sum it up quickly. And so I think, but like you said, Albania's EU accession plans are key to all of this.
Right. I think there's just, so many parallels in this story here with what's playing out in many other global capitals when it comes to this kind of breakdown of trust between civil society and the political leaderships, especially in many democracies as well. So this is a story that is very important, one that we will continue to watch. But for now, thank you so much, Phineas, for joining us from Paris and sharing all your insights of what you saw and experienced on the ground in Albania.
Thank you, Smita. It's always a pleasure.
And thanks to all of viewers for tuning in. Thanks for watching. It's a goodbye for now. Take care.